Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Two Economists and a Lender, where we take that deep dive into the most important economic issues facing agriculture. I'm your host, Carly Jacobson. We're back here with David Widmar and Brent Gloy from Agricultural Economic Insights, along with our own Carl Watson. And while having worn several hats in the organization, he is currently serving large producers as a credit officer. So, this month's topic is one that I hear regularly about from producers looking for solutions around labor challenges. And while we don't have a silver bullet to solve labor issues, we do have some great processes for thinking through ways you can evaluate your options, ultimately recruiting and retaining the right people. All right, Brent, I'm excited for this one. Let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Carly. Pleasure to see everybody today. Beautiful day here in Southwest Nebraska. A little windy, but looking all right. So this topic is one that I think when we think about labor, challenge is the right word. I would say most farms, if you ask them that employ labor, what their top challenges are: labor availability, keeping people, retaining people, finding people is probably one of the top pain points for most operations. And there's good reason for that. And one of the reasons is if we look at kind of the national trends, the labor market is exceptionally tight around the country. So this chart just shows the unemployment rate. And you can see we had a huge spike in the unemployment rate back with COVID. Uh, as high an unemployment rate as we've seen in this country for a long, long, long time, probably going all the way back to the Great Depression. But it dropped, unemployment dropped rapidly after COVID and after people start to adjust to the pandemic. And it has since fallen nationally to what I think most economists would consider very, very tight levels, probably right at or below what they call the non-accelerating unemployment rate of unemployment. So it's really tight. And I think the other thing is that that's the national picture. But if you look at the territory that we're talking about here, it's even tighter. Take a look at Nebraska, for instance, 1.9% unemployment. What this is telling us is that basically everybody that wants a job has a job. It's resulting in a lot of interesting things. I mean, and it's not just Nebraska, South Dakota, 2.3%. I mean, the highest on here is Wyoming at 3.3%, which is still below the national average. So it's no surprise that the labor market is tight. The other thing that's happening is we're seeing a lot of people willing to shift or change jobs in this market because employers are just desperate for employees. So as we think about labor and what can we do, I think the first thing we have to ask is there a way that we can create an advantage as we go to the labor marketplace and try and find employees? How can we create an advantage there? So we're competing with all kinds of possible employers. And I think there's three key things you have to ask. One is, what are your needs? So what are the specific skills that you need? Um, because the old days of, well, we just need people are kind of over. We have to really start to think about what are the skills we need? What's the profile of that ideal employee that we're looking for as we go to the market? So, what do we need? And then we need to ask, what does our labor market look like? And one of the things that I think we can do here is start to think about with our, the potential employees that we're seeking to get. We're trying to solve a problem for them. They need a job or they want a different job. And so what can you offer them that makes it attractive to them? Who is available? What skills might they have? How many people are potentially in your market? What's required? For instance, is housing required? Is there housing availability in your area? If you have to hire somebody from not in your area, what's the needs there? can you solve some of those potential employees' needs? And if you can, then I think it makes your offer more competitive. And then third, I think we have to think about just exactly what is that offering. And that's where we're talking about specifics of, how much do we pay? But I think that is sometimes overplayed in that most employees, there's a kind of a minimum threshold of payment and we have to be competitive, but it's all the other things that start to make our offer attractive. And one of the top things I think is just what's the quality of work, or what's the workplace like in your business? Do employees enjoy working there? And how can you make it so they enjoy working there more? Because that's going to really determine how attractive you are as an employer in the long run. And it's also going to help when you go to recruit if your current employees are really happy, because potential employees can pick up on that very quickly as to what the culture is in your organization and whether this is a place that they want to spend all those long, hard hours, because we know farming business involves a lot of challenging and difficult work. It can be very rewarding, yes, but it's also, it comes with its challenges. So I want you to think about all three of those areas as we go forward.
And Brent, I think there's an example here that I saw personally here in West Lafayette, Indiana. It's actually raining here today, not to throw salt on the dry wounds of Western Nebraska. But in West Lafayette, Indiana, there was two fast food restaurants that were right next to each other. And, during the pandemic, everybody sort of had this shutdown phase and they all went to drive through, then they started to come back. And one of the restaurants opened their dining room right away. And the other one had a sign out front for about 14 to 18 months that said, sorry, due to the national labor shortage, we can't fill these roles and we have to close our dining room and our service is going to be slow through the drive-through. And as we were thinking about these three questions that Brent outlined, I was thinking about these two restaurants, and their needs are probably very similar. They're both making similar, their outputs are very similar, the inputs are very similar, so they're probably trying to hire about the same type of a position. The labor markets are almost identical. They share a parking lot, right? They're right there together. And so why was one of these restaurants able to open their dining room and not have a labor shortage? And why was the other one struggling? I think gets to this third point, the offering must have been different. And I think a lot of times when you see the national trends or the state trends about tight labor markets, it's easy to metaphorically put a sign out front and say, sorry, we can't get anybody hired. But as a manager, we oftentimes need to push through that and say, okay, what am I doing? And how can I be better about attracting labor? Yes, it's difficult, but that doesn't give us a pass. We still have to dig in. And that's going to be the goal of our presentation today. So the first step is assessing your needs. And we want to, this is another example of something that you should put down on a piece of paper. What are the tasks and skills that you're looking for? What are the minimums that you need? And there's sort of maybe minimum requirements and there's sort of ideal. And we're not just hiring a farmhand, right? We're not just hiring a day labor at these points. We need to think about, are we hiring a grain driver? They need to have a CDL. Are we hiring a tractor operator? They need to be able to work with the technology in the cab. The other consideration here is maybe the timing of the type of position you're looking for. Do you need seasonal help? Do you need year-round help? Maybe you just need something for a specific time of the day or the time of the week. Maybe you need somebody to help with morning chores or evening feedings, or maybe over the weekend and the holidays. Really get specific about what it is that you need, and that's going to help you as you approach the labor market. And the third point here is really spend some time thinking about short-term needs and long-term needs. And it's very easy to get caught up of putting out the fire that's right in front of us today. And we might get short-sighted about how we might be able to solve a couple of our problems in one decision. So some examples is maybe you anticipate a future retirement, or maybe you anticipate some turnover. Maybe there's some opportunities for you to promote somebody in your organization, and maybe you need to backfill those positions. Or maybe your organization has strong growth plans. Maybe you want to expand the operation, bring on more livestock or bring on more acres. And so you know that you're going to need to hire for some roles down the road. So thinking about this a bit more strategic, a bit more long-term can really be helpful and pay some dividends.
And David, I think this is also a good chance, to write that job description down. And it doesn't have to be super fancy, but going through the process of putting that pencil to a paper and writing those specific, expectations and needs down can be very, very helpful, not just for employee, but for you, so that when they come on, you have a better idea of how do we train someone up to meet our needs.
The second point here that we've brought up is really understanding what your labor market is. And Brent did a great job of framing that up. I'm going to share a few more ideas here. Small adjustments can really change the size of that pool that you're trying to attract. And so we have an example over here is maybe you're seeking a grain cart driver to work 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and you're only going to need them for the harvest season. And the universe of people in your local community that are looking for that type of job is probably pretty small. But what changes can we make to make that position fit some of the needs or some of the opportunities that those job seekers are looking for? So maybe here's a potential example. Maybe we split this job into two roles. Maybe there's a 40-hour-a-week position in here, and maybe there's a part-time position for a high school student or a college student or somebody else in your community who can help out on the weekends or in the evenings. And maybe there's opportunity for them to cross-train each other. And so really thinking about ways we can adjust, cast a wider net, so to speak. So maybe it's thinking about full-time versus part-time. Even part-time is ambiguous. Is it 20 hours a week? Is it 30 to 35 hours a week? You'd be surprised at how those small changes could really change that. Another consideration is farm experience versus ag experience versus no farm experience. How broad are you willing to, again, cast that net, and are you viewing your ability to sort of recruit these different employees? And a third consideration here is maybe these H-2A visas. So this is a situation where you might be looking outside of the traditional labor force in your area, maybe looking at this a little bit more broadly. And so this is another way of sort of, getting down on the 2 sheets of paper. What are you looking for, and what are some of the opportunities here, and how can you right size those, or how can you get those lined up in a way that you could seek more than this needle in the haystack? It's really easy to write a job description that fits one person or maybe less than one person, right? But you gotta get the job description to match with what's available for you to pull from.
And David, that's a great example. I mean, in AEI, our business, David has done a tremendous job of doing just this, like splitting jobs, being willing to look for people who might be interested in less than full-time work, and have been able to attract some really, really talented people through that kind of approach. So sometimes those small tweaks can make a huge difference in the kind of people you can get and your ability to attract them.
I think nationally, Brent, right, this work from home movement that's happened in the pandemic is something that we see more widespread. It might not work for your specific farm, but maybe there's an accounting role or a bookkeeping role, or that could fit into that wheelhouse. But that's this idea of, Facebook and Google, they're changing how they've defined where people need to be to work for their organization. Yeah. So getting to the last point here, what is your offering? And really, dollars per hour is often the scorecard. It's the thing that we benchmark at the local coffee shop. And we want to challenge you just a little bit and recognize you have to be competitive in this space, but what else can you offer? This is a tight labor market. And so we need to, try to solve some of the needs that those in the workforce are looking for. And so the salary, the wage, the dollars per hour, again, is easy to get caught up on, easy to spend a lot of time on, but we need to think beyond that. Another area that we often spend a lot of time thinking about with this base offering is maybe the benefits. There's healthcare, retirement, paid time off, work from home, bonuses in general. But as we think about building a stronger offering, you can think to that next level, to the benefits. And then maybe the third example here is equity. We see this offered a lot, maybe again back from Silicon Valley, this get shares in a startup company, maybe in a farm, you're going to help transition your ownership to the next generation. And that's often held up as this silver bullet, so to speak, or this idea that works really well for a few people, but it's often really difficult and it takes a lot of time to put something there together. It's sort of the most complicated version of this, but encourage you to sort of just assess where you are today and think about how you can make tweaks and adjustments over time to really work your way through offering a stronger competitive offer. And there's an idea here that I want to pull from. It's the idea of a moat. So back in the medieval times, we used to build these big castles across Europe, and we had to defend these, so these castles, they'd go harvest everything outside the walls, and we bring in all of our goods and we store it behind the castle walls. And eventually they said, how can we make the castles even more defendable? So they would dig these big moats. And so this idea is we sort of dig a hole around the entire castle. We'd have a bridge. We could pull up the bridge, and defenders would then have to go through the water and maybe put an alligator or some dangerous type of wildlife in the moat. They have to swim through the water and then scale the walls. And the idea we want to pull from that is think about this labor workforce issue that you're trying to solve, the challenge, as an opportunity for your organization to build a defensive moat. And that defensive moat can be helpful to discourage maybe other employers in your community who want to poach your employees. If you have really good employees, they're going to be looking at, hey, how can I get some of this guy's workforce or this organization's workforce? They have really good employees. And on the other end, a really strong moat helps those who are inside the castle feel safe and secure. And so putting together a really strong, competitive offering, again, dollars per hour is one component of it, but all the other issues that we've talked about can help you put together a strong competitive offering, a strong moat, and that can help you retain and recruit and develop a strong workforce. A couple other points here about thinking about your offering is the idea here is to be strategic. Are you trying to hire experience, or are you willing to train? And there are some long-term benefits, but also some short-term trade-offs. And I think that's a really important question that you have to think about, because training can be really valuable. It can help you cast a wider net, but you got to put a training program together, and that's not costless. And you need to think about the trade-offs for that. The other piece here is to get creative. Spent a lot of time at a university, and so internship programs, I used to think of those as like, oh, we're busy in the summer because it's the growing season, and we need to have all these interns going around helping us do these tasks. And as I've aged and stepped back and thought about this a little more, it's like, well, are they really trying to solve their labor shortage for the summer? Or are they really trying to develop a pipeline of talent? Are they really trying to find ways to recruit and retain and develop a workforce for tomorrow? So you might be able to think about what can you do in your community with the high school or local community colleges to develop relationships that could pay off down the road. Again, another get creative idea is, the other side of look at other people's moats. What are some of the best employers in your community doing? What are some of the worst employers in your community doing? How can you maybe raid those that have good employees that don't have competitive offerings? But then how can you also take what other people are doing really well, and how can you incorporate that into your offering and just sort of make sure that you're leveling up and staying competitive in that space? To wrap this up, before we get to our questions with the lender this month with Carl, a couple final thoughts. Keep in mind that really the labor component, if you think about labor expense, is a function of family labor and non-family labor. We've talked a lot about the non-family labor component, but we've got to step back and look at this a bit holistically. We have an entire webinar about family living expense. We encourage you to go check that out as well. But this is sort of this, we always want to step back and look at these collectively. The next piece is current employees can provide you a lot of valuable insights. They can help you recruit. They can help you put together a better offering. They can even help you think about what types of roles do you need to hire next? What kind of positions do you need to look for? What kind of they're really good at recruiting as well. They'll tell you who in the community or who in their network might be looking for an opportunity. And then the third point here is the labor challenge is a bit of a moving target. It might stay consistent for a year or two, but you can guarantee, you saw the unemployment chart data. It doesn't stay in one level for too long. And so be willing to update and revisit your plans often as conditions evolve and change. All right, so at this point, I'm going to invite Carl to join us. Carl's been really helpful in helping us pull our thoughts together and preparing for today's event. So Carl, thank you so much for your efforts and for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I certainly appreciate being part of this webinar.
Carl, tell us a little bit about yourself.
In my current position with Farm Credit Services of America, I've been a credit officer and part of the large producer underwriting team for a little over 5 years. This large producer underwriting team focuses on underwriting and servicing large and often complex loans to agribusinesses and agricultural producers. My area of focus is on those operations that are headquartered within the state of Iowa.
So, Carl, Brent and I have just a few questions for you. And the first one I have is, you've had the ability to work with a lot of farms across a lot of geographies, and I want you to share just a little bit about some of the labor observations that you've made with working with different operations.
Sure. Over the last 5 years, as a large producer underwriter team, we have compiled benchmark data for some of the larger grain operations and those customers. And as we compile that data, then we present it back to those particular customers that contributed to the data. And in this manner, we compare and contrast those operations with a focus on what's working and with a strive to help help our customers to become more efficient and profitable. Within that benchmark data, we've compiled labor and family living withdrawals. And as we analyze that data, the last couple of years, that data is telling us that the operations with a combined labor, which includes their benefits and the family withdrawals, are right around that $50 per acre range. And it's trending down slightly last year or so.
Again, that's both of those categories, the family living and the non-family labor put together. But that's a helpful benchmark for producers to think about as they consider their own operation. Now, I always have a saying that averages can lie. So help us think a little bit about some of the outliers or some of the extremes that might occur in this data.
Sure, we see a wide range in labor and family living withdrawals. Most of the operations that provide benchmark data to us, that data is ranging. The vast majority of the data ranges from the low to mid 40s to the mid 50s. And of course, we have a couple of operations that may be outliers of even that range for particular reasons. With that said, it all depends on the operations, and some of those farms could have higher family living needs to particular family circumstances. For example, having multiple children in college at the same time, or even having an aging family member that requires additional care can really drive up those family living needs. On the other end of the scale, we see some operations that have relatively low labor costs. Particularly, we see this with operations that may be incorporating some custom farming operations where they are having a neighbor come in and actually do some of their custom farming. Of course, there's labor there. That labor cost is just buried within the cost of that custom farm rate and doesn't show up as a direct labor cost.
And so it's, again, one of those ideas where if you manage a specific metric too closely, like your labor costs or your machinery costs, you can drive those very, very low, but you're going to push something else up. So you got to sort of have a holistic view of that as well. But Carl, I think one of the points you shared there could be an interesting solution for producers to think about is if they are facing really difficult labor challenges and maybe they can't get their hay baled in a timely way, or they can't get their crop sprayed, is maybe they look to a neighbor or to a retailer to help them with some custom applications or custom farming to help offset, because that's really, the labor and the machinery component of custom is one of the big solutions there. What are some of the more creative workforce solutions that you've seen farms deploy in your experience?
A lot of the operations have gotten very creative, as you've indicated. We've seen operations become much more sophisticated with their benefit packages by offering retirement plans and health benefits and those sorts of things, that, just like you've previously discussed. We do have some customers who have developed their own employee handbooks that outline those additional benefits. But I acknowledge that takes quite a bit of effort on those operations to develop those sorts of packages. But there's a lot of different creative things going on out there. One particular example kind of jumps out at me a little bit. One operation has a very unique approach to how they seek out some of their specialized labor. They seek out and identify older retiring farmers in their area. So as some of those older retiring farmers approach the sunset of their operation, they can have an income tax issue, and it becomes very difficult for them to exit their farming business very quickly. So to help manage the taxes, sometimes it takes multiple years for them to get completely out. So operations, this one in particular that I know of, they work with those producers, bring them on as hired labor, and help them through those transition years. They're able to tap into their expertise, driving planter, being able to run planters, driving combines, and that sort of thing, because they have those specialized skills. But then also that helps those other retiring farmers through a transition period and as they exit their farming business.
I'm curious a little bit on the benefits side. How many producers put together sort of a benefits package that go beyond the base compensation from your observations?
It's really hard for me to put a particular number on that, but the vast majority of the producers that we work with have some sort of benefit package beyond just paying a certain dollar per hour for those labor wages. And the benefits can vary quite widely, as you've discussed previously in this presentation. So, housing, access to machinery and equipment, and that sort of thing. I'd like to point out that, Farm Credit does have an Ag Start program helping young beginning farmers get started. And a lot of times with those Ag Start customers, we see them sharing machinery and equipment with their parents or grandparents or other family members. We've seen operations that have also taken advantage of that. And even though it's not a family member that's in that Ag Start program, maybe they have a key employee that also lives on a farm or is trying to farm their family ground, and giving them access to some of that machinery and equipment in a very similar manner, sharing that equipment in exchange for some labor in a timely situation can be an added benefit to those particular key employees.
Another question with respect to labor for you, what's a piece of advice maybe that we haven't covered today that you would encourage folks to think about?
Beyond the labor, I'm going to use a phrase that has been out there in the industry quite a bit. My suggestion is bulletproof your balance sheet. I can't take credit for that particular phrase, as it's been around the industry for a lot of years. But, I'd like to point out that we're in a current economic environment that has lots of opportunities to be very profitable. So my thoughts are to strike while the iron's hot and build some strength and risk-bearing ability into those balance sheets and help bulletproof it. Because a lot of producers that I talk to don't believe that the current economic environment is going to last, where the prices are going to stay this elevated for a long period of time. So take advantage while you can and build in some risk-bearing ability while the fire's hot.
Well, great, Carl. That's been super valuable. Appreciate that.
Yeah, some really good questions. We have one that says, what are good resources to determine fair pay in our area? I'll give this kind of standard response that the USDA National Ag Statistics Service does a farm employee wage rate survey. That will give you some idea of kind of what is typical. But like every survey, every situation, I think, with employment is unique. And so, you have to kind of balance that with what different skills your employees are bringing. Beyond that, I'd say, you need to be talking to, other people in your community, whether they be agribusinesses, because in some ways that's one of your top competitors. So, I don't think it's unreasonable to, develop a relationship with an agribusiness, one of the agribusinesses around, and get to the point where you can ask them, what are you paying your employees, and what kind of benefit packages are you offering? And I think those are reasonable questions. So I think you have to ask around. I don't know, David, you might have, and maybe Carl, you might have, I don't know if your benchmark reports provide that kind of data or not.
We do have some of that data available. It's something we can definitely take a look at and visit as a one-off with some customers.
Yeah, so I think that would be another good source.
I always encourage folks to think about, oftentimes that could be anecdotal evidence. We have to be careful with anecdotal stories or evidence. You always have to think, okay, what's the base pay? Because we had to be competitive there. But then what's the rest of the offerings that are going into that? And I think that to build up Brent's idea of developing a network of other managers, maybe they're agribusiness or other farm managers, to really be able to roll up your sleeves a little bit and get beyond just sort of that base dollar per hour rate or dollars per year value to really understand what goes into that. If you're providing a house and a vehicle and a freezer full of beef twice a year, that starts to really skew that a lot. So just keep in mind, we want to be a bit of an investigator here and dig in to really understand the context of any specific data point.
David, I think that's another good point. And it's something I think sometimes employees forget, that some of the other benefits they're getting. How much is the housing that you're providing? If you're providing them housing, how much is that worth? And I think it's sometimes important to communicate that to them, so that they understand where their compensation is at. So don't be afraid to let that, remind them in a subtle way sometimes of some of the other benefits they're getting. Another question, can you discuss some of the advantages of changing from a W-2 employee to a 1099 contractor? Now, I think that's a question for your accountant, and I think there's some labor rules that would apply to that. So it's not just so simple as going out and changing your employees over to 1099 contractors. I believe that, if they're doing substantially the same work as they were doing as a W-2 employee, they need to remain a W-2 employee. But that's, in my mind, an accounting and legal question as much as anything, and not something that I can give a lot of advice on. David, maybe I'm off base.
No, I think that's spot on. I think if you're going to hire somebody to come out and artificially inseminate your cattle, that's a very contractor relations. But on the other hand, if you're hiring them to come out on this day and use these tools and these materials and these services, that starts to become more like a true employee. And as Brent said, there are labor laws, and you want to sort of talk with your accountant about that. But in general, the idea is, are they an independent agent working to accomplish a specific task for you, or are they somebody who's working for your operation and contributing to sort of the broader efforts? One of the advantages for you is the withholdings and all of the piece that goes along with those W-2 elements. You're just paying the flat rate, and then you're 1099 at the end of the year. I think that's the reason why a lot of folks find that attractive. I think it can be a challenge for your employees. If you don't sit down and explain to them that they are a 1099 contractor, you aren't doing withholdings, and they're on the hook for all of the taxes that are associated with that, they can get a really big sticker shock come April 15th the next year when they sit down and do their tax. And so in a lot of cases, you might want to sit down with them and really help them think about what that tax liability might be, and how much they might be needing to hold back to make that next that tax payment. Because I think that's ultimately one of the downsides is there's a savings effort that has to go into that.
Well, and I think in my mind, it's clearly a legal issue, or as to what an employee is, and there's a lot of rules, and so you want to make sure you're following the letter of the law.
Yes.
Other questions. I see there's a question here. There's a little bit more general than labor. So labor costs are going up rapidly. I think we can see that and observe that. But so are a lot of other costs, and energy, I think, is on a lot of people's minds now. Dave, do you have any thoughts on kind of, costs more broadly, or energy specifically?
I think gasoline prices is something that it's one of those prices that get reported every time you drive by the gas station or you go around the water cooler. Brent and I think a lot about prices that get reported a lot and prices that don't get reported a lot. Sometimes the local labor market doesn't get reported a lot, but gas prices do. We just looking at some data. I think the national average is at $4.50 a gallon. We spent 12 weeks above $4 a gallon now. And the last time we had any time above $4 was back in 2008. And we had about 7 weeks. And so we're at in nominal terms, or the price posted is the highest price you've ever seen for gasoline. But when we adjust for inflation, it's still below those 2008 levels. And we've already seen that start to reduce gasoline consumption. So gasoline consumption has been sluggish. 2 years ago, we were talking about the pandemic and how gasoline was struggling from that. We saw a brief recovery in late 2021, but now we're back in a gasoline slump. And so we'll see how that pulls together. But it's farm diesel, it's natural gas, it's all energy. And as we know, we're a pretty energy intensive economy. And so it's going to find its way into about every sector of the economy.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem. And I mean, the easiest analogy I can think of is, back to the Trump trade war and the impact it had on grain markets, particularly soybeans. So when all the trade war started, China basically stopped buying soybeans from the United States. We still sold soybeans. They just had to travel places they didn't necessarily want to go. So you kind of re-engineer the flows in the economy. It has a huge cost, and I think to a large extent that's what's happening with energy right now. So it's not that all of the Russian exports are gone. They're there. They're going, but they're not being bought in the quantities by the same people that were buying them in the past. And so those places are trying to find different supplies, and they're bidding up against other people. And I think that's largely what's happening, is this kind of reshaping of trade flows, and it has a substantial cost. And we're feeling that in the United States. And I think we're going to continue to feel that for a while. So it's going to be interesting as to where the American pain point is at, and where this trips the U.S. economy into some kind of a recession. And unfortunately, I feel like we're going to find out. I hope we don't, but I feel like that's where we're headed. We just don't know exactly when or at what point it becomes too much. But my wife just texted me. She's in Maryland this week, and she's texting me like pictures of gas pump prices. So this is one of those prices, right, David, that we get seen a lot. And they're higher than they are here, but it's not actually as high as I thought they would be. Any other questions? I don't see any others on our screen, Carly. So I think we're safe to kind of wrap up.
You betcha. You never know where we're going to go in overtime, and I'm glad today it was out on energy, so we'll try again next month. That'll do it for another episode of Two Economists and a Lender. Thank you to David, Brent, and Carl for leading today's conversation, and for you in the audience. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you online again next month.